Hi, everybody. Happy Monday. I'm going to go ahead and get started here at 6:59. So it's just about to be 7 o'clock. I want to start today just typically as I always do. I'm going to go over a couple things that are coming up and just taking a look at Canvas together just so that we're all on the same page. So I'll go ahead and share my screen so that we can all take a look at that together. Okay. So just a couple things that are coming up. It is week 7. And so this is the week where your Bruce Perry research paper is due. That paper is due on October 3rd. You do not have any Bruce reflection. So like your typical reflection that you post doesn't exist this week. Now, it was like live on Canvas, and that's totally my bad. That had just been moved over from a previous semester, but I deleted that. Only one person had finished that, and I talked to them individually. But while you are required to read chapter 6 and 7, you're not required to do an additional response for that. There will be a lecture quiz that I'll post following today's lecture, but really your focus this week is this lecture, this is a very deep lecture. After the lecture, then ensuring that your research paper is due. I haven't had hardly any questions on this, so I'm hoping that you all feel really confident and that submission box is open already. I don't have any submissions yet, so please let me know. Shoot me an email if you struggle to get that submitted. Just want to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we can go into next week, which is our fall break, having everything turned in. And then by the time that you come back from fall break, I'll have those research papers graded as well. So when we come back from that, we'll kind of get back into our normal schedule. The only other thing to check out is just that midterm. That'll be that third week of October, so week 10. And essentially all that you'll have to do that week is I'll have a quiz posted from Monday to Friday. And so you'll just have to hop on and complete that. So just a really quick, also just I'll read over again just to make sure we're all on the same page. So the research paper, you're selecting 2 of the chapters and then completing an in-depth analysis, 4-page minimum. I had a couple people email me and just send me their document just to kind of check over. I just did a quick glance for format, and a couple people have gone over the 4 pages. I love that you guys are interacting with the text and that you feel not that you feel passionate, because obviously there's some really difficult topics in this book, but you're connecting with it enough that you want to go further in the analysis. That's awesome. So just using those 2 to 3 peer-reviewed journals to cite as your evidence for your deeper analysis. So yeah, that's really where we're at. And then at the end of the month here, so probably when we come back from fall break, I'll start talking more about the film reflection. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing here. And I will switch over to the slideshow for tonight. Okay, so today's lecture is a really difficult one. This is definitely one that deserves some potential like content triggers and things like this. Like we're talking about child abuse and neglect. And we're going to go through the different types of abuse and what makes neglect this evening. And so obviously, like you're watching this as a video, you know yourself, you know what you're capable of taking in. If the content becomes too difficult tonight, you can pause, come back another day, you can skip over a section. If you'd rather just for some parts not hear me talk about things and you just want to jot down some notes if it gets too difficult, you definitely have permission to do that. Listen to yourself, listen to what you need. There are some really heavy topics tonight. So I hope that you've been able to see so far in this class the wide spectrum of support that children need. We learned in our previous lessons that a significant amount of children have experienced trauma or will experience trauma. And so when we're working with a child, no matter what the situation or the environment is, we have to come in with the mindset that they have experienced trauma, and understanding the different types of trauma and then the effects that this could have on children, but then also looking at from a social work perspective, what types of services are available, what should be available, and essentially like even if you're not a social worker, what can we do to help the intervention process? So child abuse and neglect, protecting children when families cannot. This is going to be over the content from chapter 7. So Types of maltreatment. We have physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, and then emotional or psychological abuse. This is like the biggest PowerPoint of the semester. This is a really big one. So there's some slides that I'm going to take a little bit extra time on, and then a slide like this, I'm going to go pretty quickly because we're going to spend a lot of time really digging into this and understanding the different types. So starting with physical abuse. Physical abuse is something that is non-accidental and an injury that is afflicted upon a child. Obviously, like if you trip and fall on a kid, it's not a type of physical abuse. It's some type of, you have made the decision to, whatever you're doing, your intention is to hurt the child. Typically, the caregiver is the one that's inflicting the injury on the child. And then some indicators and symptoms: bruises, burns, fractures, abrasions, and head injuries. A lot of times with physical abuse, whether you're working with a child or an adult, some things like they could be wearing, like, for example, this behavior, like clothes that are going to be covering their entire arms, or it might be in the summer and they have full sweatpants and sweatshirt on because they don't want people to know the different bruises and abrasions and things like that that they're hiding. Some of these people are also considered chronic runaways, which means they're chronically, which means over and over again, trying to run away. Extreme behaviors, destructive to self and others. It's kind of that mindset of like, if your parents are treating you this way, your parents that are supposed to be the people that love you more than anyone else in the world, if they're physically hurting you, then why would you not do that to yourself as well? Because your value and worth is really going to be quite diminished. Again, destructive to self and others, no physical contact, and then sometimes afraid to go home. Again, it's that whole like the trust. The trust is broken with any cycle of abuse here. If someone's abusing you, if pretty much the rest of your life, you're really going to struggle to trust people, specifically if it's a physical abuse situation and someone's trying to hug you or be close to you. Your initial reaction is that they might be hurting you, and that's that flight, that fight, or that freeze mindset that your brain goes into. So thinking about, why do people abuse children? Why do people abuse other people? A lot of times abuse is cyclical, which means people that do abuse children were abused as a child. Sometimes this involves substance abuse. Sometimes this can be high stakes situations, emotional stresses, social stressors, or maybe even the individual child's personality. Some people have significant mental health situations, and they hurt their child because they want to remain in control of that child. That's that Munchausen by proxy. So essentially, what we're going to look at through this PowerPoint today, physical abuse, when you think about abuse and, oh my gosh, this child's being abused, physical abuse is the one that you really think about. And I think typically, like in cartoons and media, you see the black eye on the girlfriend. But I really want you to expand your brain today to think about the different types of abuse, ones that we aren't able to see, ones that might have clear signals, but then also having a deeper understanding of why people choose to abuse other people, and then how can we recognize that a child is undertaking abuse, and then what can we do after. Let's talk about neglect. So neglect is not really a word that you probably hear pretty frequently unless you're in the social services world, because neglect doesn't sound as bad as abuse. Like when you hear abuse, you're like, we need to call Child Protective Services. We need to figure this out. But if a child's being neglected, that seems more like a phone call home, or, oh, let's figure out what resources we can give. So let's go ahead and go through some of the neglect, and then have a few questions in your brain about the severity of abuse, and can we create sort of like a relationship here between, or a comparison between abuse and neglect. So neglect also similarly has many different forms. Neglect could be abandonment, expulsion, or shuttling. We read about this in previous chapters of Bruce Perry, the instance when the child was just left in the bedroom all the time in the dark. Nutritional neglect, so the child is left repeatedly hungry. Clothing neglect, the child does not have proper clothes to wear. And even this idea of like a child dressing themselves and understanding what would be appropriate and having appropriate options to wear. In the past few weeks, I've noticed a student at my school. It's not my student, but she always has really inappropriate clothing on, and not inappropriate as in like super showy or anything like that, but it just looks like she's a bigger girl, and it just looks like the clothes are for a much younger child. And so to me, I would consider that clothing neglect, and that doesn't necessarily have to have a negative intention. It's not like the parent is making that choice. Maybe there's financial issues there, but that's still a part of neglect if the child doesn't have the proper clothing to wear. Medical neglect, so denying a child proper health care, delaying obtaining health care in a serious medical situation. Environmental neglect, when a child is not protected from the harm of the environment. Emotional, which is inadequate nurturing or affection. Again, that's come up a lot in the Bruce Perry book. And then educational neglect, which is failing to enroll a child in school. In America, all children have to go to school 2 through 16. In most states, it's through the graduation, which is typically 18. So some symptoms of these different types of neglect: consistent hunger, having very little energy, inappropriate clothing, tired, body odor, lice, unattended physical and medical problems. A child is still a child, and a lot of times, even when a child is going through a difficult situation, they become a lot more independent and a lot more responsible. They still don't have the proper understanding, the financial resources, and a lot of times just that general like social understanding of how to take care of themselves. A kid is still a kid. They need help understanding what's appropriate. They need help learning how to properly clean themselves and to feed themselves and when to go to sleep at night. A lot of kids, if they're not given a specific bedtime, you can tell very clearly the next day when you go to school. And so while a lot of people don't necessarily see neglect as equal to one of the other types of abuse, obviously going through this list, you can see that there's a really significant negative impact, because all of these symptoms are going to lead to a really, really difficult academic experience, which, who knows, depending on the situation, could lead you into other really difficult situations. So just looking a little bit more at that neglect, these are students that also tend to not be at school, so staying at home. Again, if the parent is neglecting your situation of appropriate clothing or bedtime or things like that, they're not going to be the parent that's waking you up early, making sure that you get dressed, getting on the school bus. And a lot of times in these situations, these are also parents that are working multiple jobs, so that they can pay the bills. And so maybe their parents are not there to ensure that they can make it to school. Lacking the stimulation and consistency and encouragement that benefit normal children. There comes a point in a child's life where they're excited for that independence, where they look forward to picking out their own clothing or making themselves a meal. And it almost becomes, it becomes something of a rhythm. They look forward to that routine. And if a child is experiencing neglect, they're missing a significant portion of that routine, and they're not going to be able to seek that independence and benefit from that. So there's 3 different types of neglect. Disorganized neglect. This is people who are specifically like going from crisis to crisis. So instead of solving the problem, there's a lot of Band-Aid fixes. Typically, I just went to a training by a psychologist, and she talked about a mother who was neglecting her child, and couldn't pay rent. And so they were consistently moving from motel to motel. And every once in a while, the mom would come home with new tattoos. And in this day and age, tattoos are not cheap. Tattoos are expensive. And so sometimes people make choices that don't actually solve the problem, because they see a quick solve, or they see, oh, this will fix it today. I'm surviving today's crisis. And when today's over, I'll survive tomorrow's crisis. So obviously, if you're constantly moving around, or if you're focusing day by day, it's going to be really hard to make sure that your child is receiving the support they need. Depressed neglect. So these are people that have a guard up that against expressing both affect and cognition. So this is more of the idea of people that just don't want to have to go through the thinking process of how to fix their situations. And honestly, like even in their brain, like struggling with the idea of how to connect with a child and the thinking process that relates to understanding another human and the cognition of this is a child, this is what a child needs to be successful. So the depressed neglect is getting more into brain chemistry and your actual understanding of what it takes to have a relationship with the child and what they need to be successful. And then the impact of neglect is failure of adequate brain development. And so, again, we've read this in the Bruce Perry text, but the more that a child is neglected, the more severe that their brain is going to suffer. The more severe the suffering their brain will take. It'll become more difficult for them to create relationships and attachments that are neutral or positive as they get older. Okay, so looking at sexual abuse refers to a sexual activity with a child who's being used for sexual stimulation by another person, typically an adult. Types of abuse. So again, this typically is a category that some people are pretty uncomfortable with. I encourage you to listen through so you have an understanding of what these are. But again, as I stated in the beginning, if anything becomes too difficult, you can always pause and come back or skip a section. So incest or familial abuse. So this is someone who is in your family or in your bloodline who is taking advantage of you sexually. Extrafamiliar molestation. So again, this is very similar to that incest. It's someone outside of that family ring, but still close. And to be molested or molestation, it's specifically when someone is touching one of the private areas of a child. Pornography. So this could be showing a child pornography, forcing them to watch it. And then as you see later in the ring here, potentially forcing a child to partake in a pornographic video as well. So filming them doing something inappropriate against their will. Sex rings. So this is obviously like a very dark and seedy situation. This goes along with prostitution. Sometimes people will essentially like kidnap a child for the complete desire of like sexual abuse. So prostituting them out, selling them to sex rings, things like that. Cults. So sometimes there would be a cult where a child could be seen as higher or something that's like a special entity. And often, well, in most cases, you have a male who is the leader of a cult. And as soon as the girls are old enough, meaning 10, 11, 12, they're married off spiritually to the head of this cult and now forced to have sex with this older man or potentially have this older man's child. And so that would be an example for cults. Abuse within institutions. This can be any type of institution. Unfortunately, in the news, this stuff pops up pretty frequently. Schools, churches, daycares, just people taking advantage of a child. Grooming. This is offenders that typically groom children by initiating processes of wearing down their defenses and then desensitizing them to sexual activity. A lot of times grooming happens online, especially in 2025. If you look at that next category, a pedophile. So this is someone that's older, that's specifically attracted to children. A lot of times people, specifically pedophiles or sometimes older teenagers for younger kids as well, log on to different online gaming websites, different chat rooms, and they just start off as friends and they push the boundary just a little bit more, until eventually it becomes sexual abuse. So the symptoms for this are both physical and emotional. Some physical symptoms is different formation of rectal and vaginal tears. So of course, if they're forcing penetration on a child, that's going to cause a lot of damage. Urinary tract or yeast infections, burns or bruises in the genital or rectal areas, and then different STDs. So I think a lot of times when you think of sexual abuse, you think a lot of the emotional, but it's important to point out those physical symptoms as well. Mood swings, crying, self-harm, bulimia, anorexia, suicide attempts. Um, if a child is being sexually abused and there's none of these signs, it usually means that the reaction is delayed or the child has repressed the material to the point that they're even unable to feel it. When a child is sexually abused, it's extremely confusing to them, especially if it's someone that's in their family or in their extra family circle. It's going to become really difficult for them to understand who they can trust, who they can feel comfortable with, and they're really going to have a difficult time forming connections. And eventually, as they get older, if they want to grow closer to another person, they're really going to struggle with that, because that boundary was crossed and that trust was lost. And it's going to be really difficult for them with self-image and understanding, just that level of trust. And so a lot of times people repress this, they try to move forward. And sometimes children that are being sexually abused don't know that it's a bad thing. They just think it's a thing that happens in their family. And so bringing awareness to this to children that we do see are struggling and have physical or emotional symptoms, or talking to people around the situation, because obviously we want to be there for the child and we want to get them out of these situations as quickly as possible. So perpetrators of sexual abuse, the large percentage of these perpetrators are male, and 50 to 70% of them have been subjected to either physical, sexual, or emotional abuse themselves. So unfortunately, it's very cyclical. That's why if you're working with a child that has gone through a type of abuse, understanding why they went through the abuse, how it affected them, and how it's not their fault is so important to break the cycle. Obviously, we don't want them to grow up and then become an abuser themselves. And so truly having them touch base with themselves about what that abuse looked like, what it meant to them, how it changed them, and then talking about preventative matters as they move forward. So looking more on like offenders, so people who could do this. So there's fixated offenders. These are people who are primarily interested in boys, and has little interest in people their own age, demonstrates social and sexual immaturity, and failed to resolve life issues. Obviously, the pronoun his is used in this frequently. That's just kind of citing back to that previous page where it said the vast majority of the perpetrators are male. Now, that's not saying that this isn't a female situation as well. There have been people on the news, specifically a lot of like female high school teachers, have had issues in the past, and like in the last few years, that's been a pretty frequent thing. But this fixated offender, it is, again, it's using the male pronoun just because the previous percentage. And so this is the type of person that just like truly has no interest in people their own age. They're immature themselves. And it seems like maybe they don't have their life together. And so they can tap into someone who's younger. A regressed offender, this is a non-conflictual partner, typically a female, and stems from stress. So this is that example I just gave. So it's not necessarily like conflict based. So maybe they're essentially grooming or tricking a younger child into thinking that their relationship is consensual and that they'll love them and all the things. And maybe this is just the female's going through a stressful time and is looking for control and feels like that's a way they can do that. Juvenile offenders, so these are children who sexually abuse other children. Again, very cyclical. Most of these children themselves have been sexually abused. A lot of these are just start off as an impulse decision. Again, part of this is some children just don't know what is appropriate. And so when a child is being sexually abused, until they have that intervention where they learn what's happening to them, they might do that same thing to another child. And so they just don't know until they know. And so then when they do find out, sometimes they want to try to take that power back and they seek out another child. And again, a lot of it's an impulse decision there. But then sometimes a child is, again, as they get older, might abuse different substances, And then substance abuse is used as an excuse by perpetrators to abuse. So as a child gets into their teenage years and maybe they're using different substances, could lead to themselves then becoming an offender as well. So we're getting there. I understand, again, this is so much and this is really difficult stuff because this is like really real life stuff. Like you turn on the news and you see something about this every day. And so let's talk a little bit about the different theories of processing and how we can get through this. So multi-factor. When someone abuses someone, there are multiple reasons why. There's typically not just one reason. Oh, you were abused as a child, so now you're going to abuse someone else. Well, we know that's not the case because the statistic was only 50 to 70%. So that could be 30 to 50% of people who have never been abused that make that choice to now become the offender. So we have to understand that with any case of trauma, if you are a perpetrator, there's going to be multiple reasons as to why. Multi-factor. Now, single factor. This is for a person that maybe has one breaking point, and that cognitive disconnection or disassociation creates a significant lack of empathy for victims. Now, I still believe that you can have a multi-factor situation up to maybe one large event where you've completely disassociated or disconnected with that one single factor. And then now we're going to blame it on that one session of cognitive dissonance, of cognitive disconnection, versus the buildup of the different factors that happened before. The process theory is used in a lot of counseling and intervention. It's used to train perpetrators to interrupt the cycle of abuse. So people who have experienced abuse, people that have abused other people, processing why they're doing that, going through the multi-factor and single factor processes and thinking about why did this occur, what can we do to change it, and truly having them break that down step by step. So our last part of abuse here, which is emotional or psychological abuse, this definitely is the least, I don't want to say it's the least reported, it's the least acted upon, and it's also the most difficult to get evidence for when it comes to like Child Protective Services cases. So emotional abuse refers to the undermining of a child's self-esteem, the humiliating, belittling, rejecting, isolating, or terrorizing a child. So emotional symptoms would be a low self-esteem, maybe they constantly talk down about themselves, destructive behavior like drugs and alcohol, and then maybe they attempt suicide, hurt themselves, and different eating disorders. Physical symptoms could be headaches, asthma, ulcers, hyperactivity, and hypochondria. So honestly, like these are just people that are just uncomfortable because they've constantly been told that they're not enough and the things that they do aren't okay. And whenever they're doing something, they're constantly like thinking through every little thing that they're doing and how it's going to affect the other people around them and see if they're measuring up. And so it's a huge buildup of anxiety, and the mental power that takes then leads to headaches and ulcers because they're constantly anxious and worried. And hyperactivity is maybe you're trying to get as much done or prove yourself. And then again, that hypochondria it's just continuously evaluating yourself because the adults, again, your emotional support system, or what is supposed to be, the people that are supposed to love you and care for you and build you up, those are the people that are constantly humiliating, belittling, rejecting, isolating, or terrorizing you. You're going to constantly be checking over yourself for what is wrong with you. Why are you receiving this negative feedback over and over again? And so there can be a lot of physical as well as emotional symptoms. Emotionally abusive parents. So often these are people that are disillusioned with their own life. They have unmet needs and unfilled expectations. So they're not happy with how their life is going. And so they're taking it out on their child. You hear this a lot in media. Maybe you've heard another person say this, but a parent may be talking to a child and saying, well, when you were born, like you completely, like I had to change everything. I gave up this for you. I decided not to do this job because I was pregnant. And so you're immediately now like saying to the child that because they're alive, which newsflash was not their initial choice, because they're alive, they've taken significant chunks of things that their parents should have, and so they constantly feel indebted to their parents. Maybe an emotionally abusive, I keep mixing those words. Maybe an emotionally abusive parent is abusing drugs or alcohol. Maybe they have their own personality or mental health problems. And usually there's that unpredictable and quite emotionally needy. The difficult thing about emotional and psychological abuse is typically it's a push and a pull. It's a, I'm going to belittle you, but then there's going to be an instance where I really need you to do something, or I really want to feel close to you and give you that safe haven for a moment. And now I'm going to belittle you again because I'm upset you haven't met my expectations. I'm upset with you for XYZ. So it's kind of a difficult push and pull, especially for a child. The best thing that you can do for a child is significant routine and structure. And emotional and psychological abuse, where it's going back and forth, is about one of the most harmful things you can do to a child. Some adolescents who are ill prepared for and overwhelmed by parenthood might find themselves emotionally abusing their children. Again, it's that kind of like you're upset with your decision, you're upset with your circumstances, and so you take it out on the child. So, what do we do when we see a child that's going through a difficult situation? Mandated reporting. If you work in a world in which you're around children, you're legally you are legally mandated to become a reporter, a mandated reporter. So physicians, dentists, social workers, educators, policemen, clergymen. I know like people that work at libraries, like anytime you're really working with a child, if it's a good business model, you become a mandated reporter. So this is where it gets really tricky. You have to have a mild understanding of the child. And then you also have to have context, and you also have to try to pull the child and learn more about the situation. But the most important thing is if it seems like something is wrong, something is probably wrong. And so each state has a simple reporting system. When I was working in Texas, I had to file, I think, 6 CPS reports. And so you log in, you talk about the incident, you talk about the child, and you have to do that legally within 2 hours of the incident, up to 30 days. Now, if you're working in a school system, or if you're working in like a doctor's office, dentist, whatever, they're probably going to tell you that you need to report it within 24 hours. There's a lot of legality with that. And then also just think about your own conscience. Like, you would never want to wait a month to report something, and then the child commits suicide, or the child is abused further because no intervention took place. So my personal practice was, if I saw something during the school day, I would try to get it reported right after school. And then that way the police and the powers that may be could take care of it. Typically also, different states have different laws, but it is no longer anonymous. And so it will say your name with that. And so I've met other educators that were nervous to do it, because eventually the police will go and check up on the parent, and they'll say, hey, this person filed a CPS report. Like, is everything okay? And so now, especially as an educator, when you're constantly trying to conference and work with the parent to better the child, it becomes kind of tricky when you file the CPS report on the family. However, again, think about the big picture. If you care about the child that you're working with, even a little, the awkwardness does not outweigh the benefit of them being alive and being in a safe environment. So usually they look at the different risk factors. Social workers look at patterns of risk rather than just one variable. Then they have different intake assessments, like a diagnostic assessment or an investigation. Sometimes law enforcement is involved, just depending on the severity. And then once the assessment workers create a picture of the family, they determine the different services and interventions that have to be identified and then put into place. Again, it is so important. I would rather file 20 mandated reporter statements about a possible abuse that I think is taking place, and have 20 of them get checked up on and none of them come back as an issue, and the children are okay, they were exaggerating, whatever the case, versus hearing one child say something to me that catches my ear and not reporting it, and then that child not being there. So definitely just err on the side of caution. As long as you have a legitimate cause to file the report, you're never going to be in trouble. So court intervention. So civil court is juvenile or family division. If parents are unwilling to cooperate, the court involvement is sought. So if there's an issue in the house and the parents are not cooperating, whether they're saying that they're not going to receive the service, they don't want to go forward with it, then the court is brought in. Involvement here ends when the conditions set by the court have been met. Criminal court is usually used for when a parent has been found to be criminally negligent or neglectful, severely injured, murdered, or sexually abused a child. So criminal court is when a crime has taken place. The court will often appoint a guardian to represent the interest of the child. In a lot of these cases, unfortunately, it's the child versus the parent. And so obviously, you don't want the parent speaking for the child in that case. And so the court will often pair that child with like a free court appointed representative, just to give them that legal aid. So the role of protective service workers. Our job is to make sure that children are protected, and that, again, like as a social worker and as an educator, like you want to keep the family unit together whenever it's possible. So giving those services in the home to better the parents, to better the family situation where it currently is, because pulling a child out of that home situation is just going to be so traumatic. And so whatever we can do to supplement and ensure that the home is going to be a safe place, that's always our first priority. Intake. So some workers are assigned to intake and screen cases as they come in. They have to be quick and creative and assertive. If you're a person who is a social worker and you're getting the intake forms or you're reading through the CPS files, you have to quickly identify what services could benefit, what type of investigation needs to occur, and then essentially also like how are we going to communicate this to the parents, the family, and the support system of the child. Now, a caseworker, these are people that are really engaging, patient. They have a lot of perseverance. They assess the different family strengths and protect the child in the future. This is the distinguishing factor between immediate danger and then cumulative harm. Really important. Immediate danger and cumulative harm. So immediate danger, that's going to be like your CPS report, your intakes where you're trying to catch those big red flags. But if a caseworker is looking at all the different factors and trying to figure out what different preventative measures can be put in place now so that when this child turns 18, they don't have all the significant trauma from being in this situation. Okay, so this is our last slide. So as we continue on, thinking about how can we make protective services better in America? So narrowing the services that are provided by CPS. This is one of those things where CPS has such a wide umbrella of things that they could be called for. Anything that we've talked about on the slide, they could be called for. If a child is like experiencing neglect and they're not wearing clean clothes, like I've heard of people call CPS for that. And honestly, like if a student or a child that you're meeting is wearing dirty clothes, yes, that's neglect, and yes, it needs to be taken care of. But if that's in a long line here, and the child with the dirty clothes or the child that it never has lunch money, is never eating, if that's here, and then here we have like a child that's actively physically being abused every day, or a child that has admitted that their parents are sexually abusing them, and we have one group of people that are supposed to take all of this, formulate different investigations, different results, go out and see these families, because all of these things need to be done in a timely manner. It's not like one takes a huge precedence over the other. But because of what a wide umbrella this is, it becomes really difficult for the people to receive the services they need as fast as they need to. So customizing the CPS response to families, because again, each family is going to be an individualized situation, developing community-based protections, promoting a larger role for informal and natural helpers. So again, like this is where we step in. So maybe you're taking this class and you are not a social worker, you're not a teacher, but you might run into a child. The more people that we can have on the lookout for children in your community, making sure that they're being treated appropriately, the better. Workers should be trained in trauma-informed practices and care. Supervision. So we're supervising people that take care of children. We're working as a community. We're trying to help parents and families. And again, we're watching over children. And then additionally, collaboration with other community agencies. When you think back about like historical early America, there was so much more of a community vibe. And there's still places in America where you have the classic, like the street where the kids are playing outside and maybe one parent cooks dinner for a bunch of the different kids on the street and they're just kind of watching out for one another. Really, like obviously how great and how awesome would that be if our world could be more like that, where we're consistently sticking our head out for other people, trying to find ways that we can support them and protect children when we see them. So no, that was a lot. Thank you guys for bearing with me today. I feel like while this is a really long lesson and like sure this one is really meaningful and gives so much good information, I'm really looking forward to reading your papers later this week. Those are due on the 3rd, so that's Friday. Everything in this class is always due on Friday. Those are due on Friday. But please let me know if you have like a question for me about the actual paper. Please do not wait until Thursday evening to email me. If I'm getting multiple people emailing me late Thursday night about the paper, you're just not going to get the best level of feedback from me so that you can be the level of successful that you would like to be. And so if you need additional support on that, please reach out to me tonight, tomorrow, even Wednesday. I would appreciate that. I have no school on Thursday at my school that I work at. So I'll make sure that I'm checking my email once in the morning, once around lunch, and then once in the afternoon and evening just to see if anybody needs anything. So, but then halfway, I mean, we have fall break. We're just about halfway. We have that midterm after that. So you guys are doing a great job. I'm very impressed with your responses. Compared to last year, you guys are integrating with the content and working in the content much deeper. So I appreciate that. So please email me if you have any questions. Let me know how I can help you. And I hope you have a good week and welcome October.